Welcome to The Jungle, where we discuss social science and applications to business and society. My name is Doug Lepisto, and I'm co-founder of Sleeping Giant Capital and the Center for Principled Leadership and Business Strategy at Western Michigan University. Today, my guest is Dr. Hal Hershfield, professor of marketing, behavioral decision-making, and psychology at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. Hal is a world's expert on decision-making and how projections of the future impact behavior. We discuss his research and recent book, Your Future Self: How to Make Tomorrow Better Today. I hope you enjoy the conversation. You wanted to say more about my background.
I love your bookshelf. A little pop of color back there, you know.
Yeah. It's
plus a teapot.
It's a skillful thing to be able to like get a background, right?
Exactly.
like time travel.
No, I've seen other sort of lead-ins, and that was an interesting one. I liked it.
I mean that, right? So, well, it's great to meet you, and I followed some. And you came recommended from Adam Grant, who said you need to talk to Hal. He's got a really interesting book coming out, and I didn't really know anything about your research. And then, I mean, you're in marketing and I'm in management, so we're in obviously, universes apart, even though we're like down the hall and next door neighbors, right? Which I hope we get to talk. I hope we get to talk about, some of that. But yeah, and so I got more acquainted with what you were doing, and I thought, wow, I mean, really interesting, insightful, impactful, easy to understand, and so relevant.
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. We can throw it if you want, we can throw that on the back of the just write it on the back.
We'll put it on the back of the thing. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I'd love to learn a little bit more about, just starting off. You're the professor of marketing, behavioral decision-making, and psychology at UCLA's Anderson School of Management.
That's right.
Ph.D. in psychology from Stanford.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Academic scholar.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yes.
World expert on the passage of time and how it impacts decisions. True?
Yeah. Well, world expert. I don't know, but yes, that is what I study.
Who would be more of an expert than you?
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, there we go.
Right. So, I think what's I've had fun doing on this podcast, kind of, we've kind of moving it towards, talking to experts like you. And I said at this interesting intersection of, academia and PhD research, trained, classically research PhD trained. At the same time, I'm like running a fund and buying businesses, and I have got a foot in that world and a foot as an academic, and seeing how research that that experts have and bringing that out into the open, there's so much more that can be done to connect those dots, right?
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree with you more. There's so much great work on the academic side that stays in these, do you remember when professors used to have like all the journals on their shelves, and it was like color coded by like editorial team, and then eventually somebody was like, we don't need those. So much of that work sits on this sort of like, metaphorical dusty shelf and doesn't get translated over to people doing, real practice. That being said, I think it's a really like open question about, what percentage of it does translate, and, are the sort of cost, where does the cost benefit analysis work out for a lot of these things too? Sometimes the effects are so small and the costs are high, it doesn't make sense. Sometimes the effects are small, but so are the costs. And so it's like, why not, but.
So I thought, we'll dive in for 30 minutes. So what is, you have a collection of, read the book, and we'll dive into that. And you've been prolific publishing in both base discipline, work in JPSP, or Journal of Experimental Psych, which for people who don't know academia, that's your kind of your base discipline, but you've also published in marketing journals, right? In a business school, management, taking those ideas, putting them, seeing them in the lens of consumer behavior or something like that. So you've published in both those places on how people perceive time and how they can make better decisions. You've got all of these interesting insights in this book and these papers. What's your favorite?
Is the next question going to be about like which kid of mine I like the
most?
What
what idea do you walk away with? And it's a discovery that you're like, that really changes how I experience the world or act in the world, or what does that look like?
No, I love that question. It's a really good question. So I think one of my sort of, I love this question because, it's like, I should sort of back up and say, like so much of my work, it's been done with other people. And I, also really believe like ideas are ideas, people sort of like mold them or whatever. But like one of the findings that I think has stood out to me as something that I really sort of love, and I do talk about it in the book, but it's not been like sort of the center of my research. I have this, paper from like 10 years ago where we looked at the role that mixed emotions can play in coping. And this is with one of my friends, collaborators, John Adler, who's just a fantastic guy. And he was a clinical psych PhD student, or had just been. Now he's the, he's a journal editor and he's a professor at Olin College. Anyway, long story short, when people experience a mix of emotions during therapy sessions, so as they're experiencing stressful events, they're more likely to show positive coping responses sort of at the next time point. And I thought I was so intrigued by this finding because it really suggests that sometimes in order to work through something, it's not just that we have to kind of like dive in and like experience the bad, but we're actually more likely to cope in a more positive way if we can couple the bad with the good. And to be able to look at that empirically, or at least in a sort of data-driven way, was really I thought that was great. And that's been one of my probably most favorite insights / studies.
And that resonates with you. Why?
Yeah. I think part of the reason that resonates is that so often I think we think that in order to make progress, it has to be hard. Or we shy away from something that could push us through to the other side because we think that it's negative. We sort of have this binary way of thinking about things. And so then to be able to say, well, it doesn't have to be binary. It doesn't have to be just hard in order to make progress. And, it doesn't have to be the case that, all we can face is the negative. But if we can sort of couple positive and negative together in the face of stressful events, that may actually be beneficial / better for us in the long run. And so I guess part of the reason why it resonates is because it sort of forces us out of the binary mode of thinking.
Well, it's my PhD advisor was Mike Pratt at Boston College, and he's a big qualitative guy. And obviously reading your work is all about identity as a core fundamental mechanism of decision-making, behavior, and Mike's work was obviously at the beginning of, at least in management and organizations, this movement around identity, both individually, but then it got to become something more collective, trying to understand that, and just the guiding of behavior and organization through sense of self is fundamental. And that seems like what your book is fundamentally talking about, is our sense of self and how we relate to that self in the future, and the perils and the skill that you can do that's where it's at.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. It's funny because I think part of what I've enjoyed intellectually in digging into this space and doing this work is that I think it's really easy to ignore identity and ignore the self in a lot of the decisions that we face in business settings and management settings. especially, right? So much of my work is in the sort of financial space, but, a lot of it's in the health space too. And it's really easy to think about decisions in an isolated way. I'm deciding between a saving now or spending. I'm deciding between, this portfolio allocation or that, or this type of leadership style or that. And fundamentally, those kind of ignore the role of identity. And so I hope it leads to a richer discussion to sort of inject these conversations with identity.
And we're not economic creatures. Fully we are and we're not. We're something more than that, right?
Right.
And we're also not cultural dopes, as our field would also say, right? So we're neither that so this notion of time travel, you say is the ability to move in time is both defining of the species and a adaptable skill, a trainable, a modifiable, maybe. Is it? I guess that's the question.
Yeah.
Is this you have some great tactics in the book. Is this a skill we can build, or are these practices we have to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think empirically, I don't know that I have like an empirical answer, because look, we could say, all right, we're able to time travel. It's, as you said, it's a defining quality of our species. And, there's debate about, some animals can do this as well, but I think it's unquestionable that nobody can do it to the sophisticated level that humans can. Or at least that's my take. Whether it's trainable is a really good question, because to some extent, a lot of what I put forth in the book is almost ways around some of our time travel errors, or some of the things that we can do to sort of sidestep them, or even to harness some of our time travel, mistakes, if you will. Trainable sort of suggests that I can like somehow get better at it, that I can get better at stepping into the shoes of my future self in a more accurate way, I guess, and I think we can get better at empathizing with our future selves, which I think makes the time travel journey easier. But as like an actual research question, I'm not sure anybody's investigated whether or not like we can actually get better at time travel per se, mental time travel.
Or, and it's that sense of, having some kind of imagination, right? And having that imagination, trying to avoid some of the traps you're talking about. But I wonder, and I don't want to go into the whole book. I feel like there's so many podcasts that just go into the book and we just talk about the book, but I'd rather talk about the implications of your book and like what you do with it. So, this notion of trainable, that it's skillful. Do you have protocols, or do you have rituals or routines that help build that muscle? In the book, you give out some great, practices around, how to, psychological commitment and punishments and avoiding changing your environment. Are there rituals or protocols that you can put into place that allow people to get better at this time travel concept?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, so I shouldn't lead every answer with, that's a great question, but that is a great, question. So what you're asking really is, is there a protocol where I could say, if I did this thing, okay, for instance, if I do 50 push-ups a day, I can most likely gradually move to 60 and then 70 and then 100. I'm going to get better at doing push-ups, right? And so I think part of the question you're asking is, if I were to do X related to time travel and then keep doing it, would I find my sort of time travel muscles sharpened? And that study hasn't been done. In other words, like, if I were to do that, if you were to hand me a pot of money and say, do this, what I would want to do is have people write letters to and from their future selves every day or every couple of days for, let's call it 2 months. and measure something related to mental time travel ability, whether it's, anxiety about future decisions, or whether it's even the decisions that people make, or whether it's satisfaction with them, or whatever it may be. And then somehow investigate whether or not that repeated exercise greased those wheels, made it easier to do it, made me somehow feel better about those decisions. So that hasn't been done. I would love to do it. In my own life, it's, I've done, of course, the exercises in the book. I've done the letter to and from your future self. And to me, it's almost become not like sort of ritualistic, but it's become more of like a, like table stakes, or it's like endemic to like the way that I try to think about things. I had a collaborator once say that like she just constantly has a conversation with her future self. I'm not there. That's not like really where I'm at. But you could imagine where in some circumstances that would be really beneficial, and in others it would get annoying, right? But that idea of creating sort of a protocol there.
So what would be your if you're prescribing to an organization, let's say, and you're going to prescribe that based on your research, this is what I think you should do. I'm imagining there's a set of exercises that people would do. What would be some of those things you would kind of focus on? Let's start there.
Great. Okay, so if I were to prescribe this to research, like imagine I was doing, you and I were doing some consulting with an organization. I'd want to first off tie this to, some sort of quarterly evaluations or something like that, so that we could sort of measure progress. And I'd want to have both managers and employees alike first do the letter writing exercise. Like have a conversation with your future self, write a letter to your future self. Let's do it at different time points, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, which I think are probably about the like the right distance for something in the workspace. And then let's write a letter back from the future self. This is ideas that Ann Wilson and Yuta Shishima have developed from University of Waterloo.
And where would someone go to? I mean, is there like where would one go to find how to do this exercise?
So
is it available?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. So one, I'll give you a couple of options. One, you can write letters to your future self on futureme.org. That's a great spot to do it. And those will literally come back to you. You email your future self at a certain point in time and it comes back. You can't, I mean, I suppose you could then write another letter where you say like, now I'm writing this from the perspective of my future self, but the infrastructure isn't set up to do that. So you would have to kind of game it a little bit to do that. Like you would just have to say, okay, I'm going to write another letter. And this one is not to my future self, but it's from. And the reason I mention that is because Wilson and Shishima found that, or Shishima and Wilson found that that's actually better at boosting a connection between current and future selves. I also have a free downloadable sort of worksheet packet. It's called, get ready for this crazy inventive name, the Future Self Tool. And that's in collaboration with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So if you Google CFPB Future Self Tool, that'll come up. And that's actually got sort of a downloadable method to do the letters. And then of course,
and you're doing this, and you're doing. So sorry, I interrupted you on the description, but you're talking about advising an organization. And you would have employees write these letters. They're quarterly or looking out at different time distances.
Yeah, I would start by saying, let's do 6 months, 2 years, maybe 5 years. I mean, it depends on the organization, right? If this is
3 letters,
I would do 3.
Okay.
We're doing this a bit on the spot, right? And so of course, probably want to do some more pilot testing, et cetera. But off the top of my head, of course it's going to depend on the organization, because there's some organizations that just naturally have a much longer time frame. Maybe, you know, ones where the employees, you know, the average tenure is 10 years. Maybe we can go further out, but other cases it's better to do shorter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, those seem like good starting points.
And what are they writing about?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would have them write about, look, I think it can be personal. Like, I mean, I think they could write about their own lives and what they want and their hopes and dreams. If I was doing this with an organization, I would want them to be writing about sort of where they expect to be in their job, how they're spending their time, who are they spending it with, what are the meaningful aspects of their sort of workday and the, you know, their activities and what they're doing and so on. The reason I say that is because I think the exercise could help sort of get people out of the like short-term focus that we so often have, right? You know, I would also, if the sky's the limit here and we're just sort of spitballing, I would also probably first want to know, like, I'd want to do some sort of audit and find out what are the problems, like what are we trying to solve for here, right? Because, you know, in a lot of my research, especially on the sort of individual level, the problems are self-defined, but relatively straightforward. I don't want to snack as much. I want to exercise more. I want to save more. I want to be more patient with my kids. I want to make more of an effort with my friends. Some of these are, I think, relatable, right?
I want to be more responsive. I want to be more responsive to my colleagues. I want to, you know, lead with empathy at the beginning of every meeting. I want to send a thank you note to everybody who I've had a positive interaction with and feel grateful for. Something like that. They pick.
Yeah. And I mean, some of those things, some of those issues aren't necessarily tied to sort of short-term, long-term trade-offs, but some of them are, because I could make the case that I'm not doing those things because I get too mired in the urgent and I don't focus on the important. So much of what you were talking about there, you know, like leading with empathy, that feels really important. And it's easy to see in my mind, it's easy to see how we could miss doing that because there's an urgent issue that comes up. We got to solve it. We got to talk about it. We got, you know, whatever the case is. I mean, you and I we both sit in sort of, you know, foot in academia, foot in like the outside world as well. And even in academic meetings where you feel like it's a little bit removed from the corporate world, we see this sort of thing where we're just so focused on the issue at hand and empathy goes out the window. And then ironically, the thing we're trying to solve urgently takes longer because we've missed something about the like connection and the way that we're talking to each other and so on, right? So I think that's a really intriguing example of a time when there could be a short-term, long-term trade-off there. And, you know, who knows, maybe these sorts of letters and exercises could work.
So everybody's writing these letters. They're writing 3 letters. And everybody writes 3 letters about something they kind of aspire in the future and trying to be vivid in the future. I love, do you know Drew Carden's work at Wharton?
Yeah, wait, I've heard of Drew, and I'm sorry, you have to remind me of his.
So he does work on leadership and imagery and rhetoric, and you know, there's this kind of vision, the vividness of the vision and how you make that compelling to drive, you know, leadership. Inspiration, connection to the future through vividness.
And Brian Lucas, I can't remember if Brian Lucas is on this work or not, but they
might be. Yeah,
and there's a paper, I think they have a paper where they have leaders, you know, pretend that they're in sort of like a spaceship or whatnot. They go ahead and they, you know, mentally time travel to the future and write these letters. And there's
Eric, do you know as an aside, do you know Eric Dane at Wash U?
No.
I'm going to connect you guys. He published in Academy of Management review paper on mind wandering.
Great.
So 3 people are doing. So everybody's writing these 3 letters. They do it once about the future in a way that of following the instructions. And then what then are we just assessing the impact on some performance metric, or how do you think about that?
So a couple of things. One is, and then I would have them, you know, I think it's key to have them write that letter back. So it's conversation. You know, I wrote a letter to my future self. Now they've got to write one back to me.
Okay.
of course, I'm literally, I'm doing both. Let's be clear, right?
Yep.
But the reason I really want to emphasize that is because if I'm just writing letters to the future, it's essentially like the analogy that I talk about in the book is it's like the date where you're the one person's the only one talking. That may feel great if you're you're the one talking, right? But it's not going to lead to a second date, and it doesn't create a connection. And so making sure that there's that letter back, that what that does is foster more of a conversation, foster more of a back and forth. Now, then you ask I don't know, $10 million question.
Well, I was just, as you say that, I'm like, I'm thinking about Mead and the construction of self. I mean, it can only happen in conversation.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Right. It's that, and that, yeah. So, okay. Yep.
It's great. Yeah, that's a really good observation. But you asked the big money question, which is then what's the impact, right? And this kind of comes back to the thing I was saying before, which is like, well, let's first do an audit of, what's the problem here? What are we trying to solve, right? Because I'm not sure I don't know what impact I would try to assess unless I first knew what the issue was. So is it, are we seeing, however it's defined, are we seeing a lot of like short-termism at this organization? Are we seeing people cut ethical corners? Are we seeing, which could be defined in a variety of different ways, or operationalized in a variety of different ways, right? You could look at that all the way to like sort of the other, like, there's like a much softer side of this, which I think is equally important, which is, do people feel like they have a sense of purpose at work? Right. There's a new paper that came out, Charles Chu and Brian Lowry, that showed that, when you get people to increase their sense of connection to their future selves, it also increases a sense of meaning in life. Not the meaning of life, but a sense that what I'm doing is meaningful. I'm not, you're in management and I'm just your neighbor, right? But
yeah.
But I would love to know, what's the work showing that employees who have a sense of purpose and meaning do better work, stay longer, cost less, happier, blah blah. I mean, feels intuitive. I don't know what the work's been done on that, but if you could show that some sort of future self conversation boosted that, man, I think that would be a really interesting outcome. Nonetheless, it wouldn't be one that's necessarily like directly related to dollars and cents. That could be sort of a downstream.
And so this is the one intervention then, is these 3 letters, different time points to and from, at different time points to and from. So 6 letters maybe. And you're doing this one time, and some outcome, and you kind of, based on your research, that one intervention is, you think, sufficient to start producing some effects.
Yeah. This is great. I love I'm hesitant to like ever say, the one thing, this one word will get people to
but that's what they say about, like on the Huberman Lab, all these kind of podcasts, right? It's 150 degrees in the sauna, blah 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 blah, 5 minutes, not 10 minutes. Maybe we don't know this yet.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of anything that feels too easy.
So not once.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I'd really want to put some thought into this. Is it done quarterly? Is it done every other week? Is there another sort of, way to kind of hammer home the intervention? Is that, look, I've done a lot of work on age progression. You show people an image of what they look like in the future. Do they print that out? Is it somewhere on their desk so that like this person is thought of? Do they see it every couple of weeks? I mean, these are like, if you and I were going to do a field study, these are the things that we would spend days on, right?
Well, it sounds like we need to do this study.
Maybe we should.
I'm going to find the company.
I mean, yeah. I'm game. So I would want to figure out, I mean, the question that I would want to ask, and I don't have the greatest answer to right now, is what are the ways that we could sort of keep that conversation top of mind without making it something that I become habituated to? Right. So, is there a world in which I could remind you of this conversation you have with your future self? Is there a single, phrase or, bullet point or two that I could pull out of that conversation that somehow gets, sent back to you as a reminder, every couple of weeks or whatever it is? The reason I say that is that, I think a lot of the research that I've done and that others have done have looked at the impact of the single intervention on a single outcome. So you write the letter, I interact with my future self. Now I got to get you to make an allocation to your 401k. Boom, you did it. I don't care if you never think about it again. If you did it and it is automatic, great. Some of the stuff that we've been talking about, it's like a repeated thing, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. Am I focused on the important rather than the urgent, the big why, etc.? Those aren't things that I can like look at once and then just like hope it just continues. It's almost like we have to create a habit. And so that's why I want to be like really careful to think about, well, what's those, if we're looking at sort of repeated outcomes, then we probably have to look at some sort of repeated intervention, but one that doesn't become boring, that we start ignoring. How many, people have put the little, screen blocker, the internet blockers on or whatever. And then, after a couple of days, it's like, yeah, screw that. I'm just going to keep blowing through TikTok and Instagram, even though it's told me to stop. Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, and then as a more of a micro sociologist, my next question would be something to the effect of, what does this look like when it's implemented in a social situation with other people?
Right.
What does it mean when everyone is time traveling together? And
that's right.
And it's a shared experience now that we're time traveling, right?
Yeah.
What does that do?
Yeah. And I love that because it brings this question of are there sort of like microcultural shifts? I don't know. Is that a it's like,
sure. Sounds like it. Yeah. Sounds like something.
Yes. Let's go with
it. We'd come up with some academic term for that. And yes. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great question because so much of, the work in this space has really been focused on the individual. And I love the idea of, what happens when the collective does it? Does that change something about organizational culture? And I don't know, but man, what I would like to find out.
So it sounds like I know that you need to you need to bounce, and so it sounds like we need to almost have another episode that we'll have a version 2 at some point, Hal, and we'll talk about some of the other really interesting, profound things that you have in this research, and also and designing this study that should be done, and maybe we'll do a podcast where 2 academics design a study live on a podcast, right? This is take them behind the scenes. How do academics actually do it? Here's a live stream of that.
I can see the producers at Netflix lining up right now to
I mean, what could be better? What could be more riveting than that? I mean, and then we also need to have a conversation about, this notion of multiple versions of self spreading over time through chains.
Yeah.
We could talk for about another hour about what that looks like. And I would come at it from a ritual perspective, and these chains of interactions are linked to selves, and we would have a blast talking about that as well. But this was fun.
I love that. This is super fun, Doug. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
We'll do a version 2 in the near future. So thanks again.
I'm game.